Welcome to Inspiring Women with Laurie McGraw. I am your host, Laurie McGraw. I have spent the past 30 years in leadership, and over the years, I've come to learn one thing. Women need women, and not just any women, but inspiring women. Tune in every week to hear from women at the pinnacle of their careers and from others who are just starting out. Episodes can be found at inspiringwomen.show or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening, and I hope you will be inspired. This is Inspiring Women, and I am Laurie McGraw. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Yael Katz, and she is the CEO and co-founder of BrainCheck, which is a cognitive ability digital health company. I'm really interested to talk to her about that. We are going into a time period in healthcare called the silver tsunami, and so cognitive functioning is on a lot of people's minds. Yael is a neuroscientist. She's authored over 20 articles with over 1,600 citations. She's an entrepreneur. She's raised over $20 million in capital. And Yael, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Well, great. Well, I always start, a podcast just diving into what are you doing right now? What does it mean in your day-to-day as the CEO and co-founder of BrainCheck?
Well, I'm running a 50-person company. We're hiring aggressively. We are building out our teams, both on the R&D side, so continuing to develop the product, and then, of course, on sales and marketing, so taking that product and getting it into the hands of users, and that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah. And so in that keeping pretty busy, you also sort of interested in terms of, how did you get here? So just looking at your background, I mean, you're an accomplished neuroscientist and, with many publications to your name, started off in swimming, and now you're a femtech pioneer. So, how did that career journey to researcher to now CEO and co-founder happen for you, Yael?
I guess I come from an entrepreneurial family. They're entrepreneurs by necessity, not necessarily by choice, like it often is now. I was one of the lucky people to go to college. So I went to Penn, Northwestern, and Princeton, and was able to spend, over a decade looking at neurons and networks and how they work, and applying different techniques from, computational and experimental techniques to that. But I've always been an entrepreneur at heart, I guess. It's something you can't really get away from. And I, at some point, looked to start a business. And I guess I just wanted to bring life to something. So instead of the output of my work being, publications, I wanted something, real and tangible. And so when I looked at leaving science, leaving academia rather, I didn't really know what was out there, because I don't think I actually knew anybody that had a real job like ever in my life. And so one thing that I did was join a consulting firm. And so in management consulting, it's not something that I would recommend to anybody. It's actually pretty terrible. But the good thing about it is that you get to see kind of a lot of the world quickly, and get to do a lot of things that you wouldn't if you worked for a company. And so consulted to pharma and biotech for about a year. And then at that time, the startups were coming to New York. So I think New York traditionally is kind of a finance town. And back in, I want to say it was like 2011 or 2012, there was just a lot of opportunity in tech in New York. And so I basically had my picks of companies, selected one more or less at random, in the video technology space, and was able to help that company grow from, I was like one of the first few people to 60 or 70. And it was a pretty amazing experience. And after 3 years of doing that, I decided to start a company of my own. And then I looked at the world and I said, what's a problem that needs solving? What skills and experiences do I have to bring to bear? And there was also a lot of luck that kind of went into it. So I so happened to meet David Eagleman, who became my co-founder, and he had some ideas, and I just decided to start a company, and it evolved into BrainCheck. So I had no idea what it would be when starting, but just kind of looked at the world and said, wow, if somebody is worried that they're not able to think clearly or losing their memory or something like that. It's just so hard to get an answer to that question. Like, what is really going on? Is this in my imagination? Is this a true thing? What area of my brain might not be working, properly, let alone why that might be. And so that was sort of what led to BrainCheck.
Well, what an interesting trajectory, sort of, with a desire to go from academia, management consulting being a pit stop that you wouldn't recommend. I love that. And then deciding that, what was important to you was to start a company. So how did the landing on the idea of BrainCheck from a, just sea of opportunity happen? Was it the networking? Was it the trying to, look at and then dismiss a number of ideas? Curious about that.
Yeah, so I would say that BrainCheck was a technology and a product before it was a company. So just like there's innovation that goes into, creating a new product, which was basically digitizing cognitive tests. So if a person does, have a cognitive concern and they're smart enough to go to the doctor, they'd get referred to a neurologist and then to a subspecialist called a neuropsychologist, where they'll be given basically tasks that they have to complete. And by measuring speed and accuracy on those tasks, we can determine if the part of the brain that is required to perform said task is working as it should. And so the idea was basically to take that experience that traditionally happens, one-on-one between a doctor, the specialist, and a patient over many hours with a stopwatch, to take that and create a digital experience. So that was kind of the idea. But I would say that an equal amount of innovation goes into the business model. And so imagine you could, snap your fingers and produce this like amazing product that does that. Who are you going to sell it to? And, what would they use it for? And so on. Making big statements like we want to democratize cognitive health and put this in the hands of everyone, give everybody the opportunity to take control of their cognitive health. Like, who is everyone? And I would say that part of the business took, it's equally difficult, took as much, if not more time in figuring out and then co-evolving the product with the market, as it were.
Well, in terms of the clinical experience of doing cognitive testing on a particular person, is this a consumer-focused company, BrainCheck, or is this something that you do in the exam room with a physician? How does the company in innovation work in a clinical setting or in a consumer setting?
Yeah, so if you're asking where we are now, we are squarely focused on the clinician. And so we basically have customized the platform to doctors and specifically to the primary care doctor, the generalist, to enable them to quickly and easily assess patients' cognitive health and then figure out who to refer on to the specialist. But in terms of like how we got here, we tried everything. We had a direct-to-consumer version where we found that we're able to get people, that by internet advertising, are you worried about your cognitive health, to take tests, but then what do they do with that? We also tried different organizations. So particularly one cause of cognitive impairment can be a concussion. So we spent some time, selling to schools and to athletic organizations. That didn't work very well. We spent time looking at senior organizations. So, assisted living and places like that. And eventually, after a lot of, trial and error and really figuring out product market fit, we landed on the primary care physician as our target market.
Gotcha. And so then let's talk about that business model innovation. So a lot of experimentation, but when did the business model part of sort of what you needed to focus on become important for your business, just in terms of the cycle? You've raised over $20 million, so you're not exactly, at the early startup stage anymore.
Oh, no. So we started the company in 2015. I think that took us about 2 years to create the technology and then really figure out the business model for it. And ideally, one would come up with the business model before creating the technology, but that's neither here nor there.
I don't think that's always true.
Yeah. So we've been focused squarely on the primary care physician, since 2017. And not only do we have the test, the cognitive assessment, but really a huge amount of our effort goes into enabling the doctor, making them the hero of the story and helping them to deliver cognitive health to patients at scale.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And so then how just sort of going from, again, academia to now into the healthcare system and trying to build a system and then sell into, how did that work? How did you form the right connections to build an effective product that was actually being used?
I mean, it's always difficult to break into selling to health systems. I mean, you know that you've been doing that throughout your career. I think I'm not sure if academia really made it easier or harder to do that. It's difficult to find a health system or anybody really that wants to be the first because it's challenging to be the first, right? You have to invest a lot of time with a young company, in working with them and being the first, I won't even say beta, but alpha customer. Our approach to that actually was to start out selling the product to independent physicians, so private practices. And that was important for a lot of reasons. First, it enabled us to build out experience. A doctor is a doctor, whether they're practicing privately or as part of a large organization. Fundamentally, the interaction between a doctor and a patient, I think, is similar. And doctors like that are able to, to make decisions quickly. There isn't like a complex sales cycle. And so we were able to build a business line selling to independent physicians. And that was really helpful when we approached, large systems, because it wasn't, telling them, hey, like, we haven't ever done this before. How would you like to be the first?
I'm curious, yeah, like just, in terms of you specifically as the leader, as the founder, co-founder, and CEO of this company. So, what were the leadership skills? Because it's not experience that you drew on to build this company. So what did you draw on? How did you sort of gain the right skills or, quick decision making that you've had to apply here as you built it? Was it just sort of, it's not luck. It's clearly sort of, some things that are either innate or you're getting from whether it's a network of folks. Just curious about you and what you drew upon.
I've never been asked that before in exactly that way. Well, I think if I had to pick one, I guess the term of the day is superpower that I think is responsible for my success in that area, I'd say it's storytelling and the ability to just connect with people over, a problem, what needs to be solved. Let's agree, we need to solve it. Here's how, and get behind me. We're going to do it, and let's run up the hill. I think storytelling, and you kind of have to do that in academia to some degree, in the sense that you have to write a grant for your research. You have to recruit others, to work on it, students and postdocs and other people, and then you have to carry out a multi-year project and publish the results, speak at conferences. I think that aspect is probably shared between the two things. There's huge differences between students and employees. There's huge differences between, writing a grant and pitching VCs, but there are also a lot of commonalities. And it's kind of interesting. I think that my academic experience, look, it was over a decade. I certainly learned a lot. It does translate, but probably indirectly.
How much of that leadership experience that you have now is learned experience versus just like you sort of had it in your gut? Lots of women talk about sort of like, those aha moments where they either took like something they've been thinking about to then have the confidence to do something with it. And also, I'm assuming that, the pandemic had some impact on your business, which has been growing during, half the life of your company has been practically during pandemic times. So I'm just curious about those leadership skills and how you develop them, whether it were big moments of aha and then moving to some next place to grow your company, or if it's just, it just sort of happened along the way and it was just doing the work that really developed those skills.
I guess I would say for me personally, I struggled less with getting the guts or whatever you want to call it to do something that I've been thinking about. The thing that I did struggle with was decision making. I think that was a skill that I more consciously and deliberately worked on. I think that what you learn in business is that you really have to work together with people, as opposed to, multiple people in parallel doing things that like ultimately are on the same theme. it really is a much closer degree of collaboration. And what's really important is to make clear decisions. And even the wrong decision is better than no decision, but to be decisive and to communicate that clearly. And I think what's difficult about that for somebody who has who's a scientist kind of at their core, like me, is that science is really all about possibilities. And, there's so many different things you can do. And it's always what if, and, you're thinking about kind of all of them at the same time. And making a decision, inherently is about closing off possibilities. It's like, we're going to go this way and we're not going to do all these other 10 things. And whether or not, you're right in a way is arbitrary. It's picking a direction and saying, we're doing this. And it's just because we have to pick one and we're doing it. And that's difficult, I think, for somebody with scientist DNA like myself.
Yeah, well, your enthusiasm for it is infectious. So it's really fun to hear you talk about, how you grew into. A 50-person company is certainly at a place of being established. Let's talk about raising money. There is a lot of study today, just all this, billions of dollars that have gone into these entrepreneurial digital health types of companies. Yet for female founders, that volume, those numbers are very small, 2%, 2.3% going to female founders. What was your experience as having raised money? I'm sure you'll be raising more, but what was your experience in the raising money journey?
I would say that consciously or otherwise, I did not emphasize my gender in the money raising journey. I was blissfully ignorant about a lot of these statistics and never really thought about it one way or the other. I think once I started, I met a lot of people who would refer to me as like a female founder. And I was like, wait, what? That was kind of interesting. I think that I certainly over time have appreciated meeting other women. And that's something that I find valuable, but it's certainly not something that I looked for at the outset. Initially, I raised a lot of money from angels, which may have been more a product of me being in Houston, which is not a tech hub, than my gender, one way or the other. I think that, after there was clear traction, I think people looked more at business metrics and considered diversity positive, which I also consider positive. But I don't think it was really a focus for most of my fundraising journey.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of investors, and some savvy investors are talking about being a female founder. It's never a better time. I don't know if it's because it's not anything special about being a female, or if you feel that you're part of a club. What do you identify with to be a successful CEO today?
I think that everybody has a different experience with this, and each of those experiences need to be respected. I think that in my particular case, my gender really didn't have to do anything to do with it until recently, when it became kind of a hot topic. I think it recently occurred to me that I was one of the only, or the only.
That is so encouraging to hear. I have to say, to not feel that you're one of only, but you're just the CEO and the leader. It's really, it's wonderful to hear that, Yael. Let's talk a little bit more about, what inspires you, as you're growing this company, BrainCheck. Who do you look to? Who mentors you? Who are your heroes out there? Or do you have people that you look to as you move on and move up in your own leadership journey?
I think that now that I'm called upon often to be a mentor, it's actually a pretty hard job. I was talking to some people at Rice University, and they were asking for advice, and striking that balance between like, oh my God, I do not want to burst this person's bubble and like just deflate them. They're so excited. But then again, you want to give the person good sound advice and not just be like, yes, go for it. It's actually really difficult to strike that balance, and learning how to motivate others and to give advice, but also to phrase that advice in such a way as like, this worked for me, take what you want from it and do what works for you. It's actually not as easy as one might think. So there are people that give me advice, and I am really grateful to them for how they deliver the message, not only the message, but the way in which they deliver it. And they do so in a way that's really motivating and empowering rather than deflating. And I want to learn how to basically capture that skill so I can be a mentor to others.
I think that is such important advice. I mean, being a mentor is not about just being an endless cheerleader without the real talk and the real advice, and figuring out how to do that without being deflating is a skill. That is just a great comment. I appreciate that. Yael, I've really enjoyed this conversation. As we close out here on Inspiring Women, any last advice you might give to listeners who might be thinking about building companies or forging out their own path for the first time? What would you say there?
I would say that life is short and just do it.
That's great advice. All right. This has been a great Inspiring Women conversation. I have been speaking with Dr. Yael Katz. And Yael, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation. I enjoyed it as well.
This has been an episode of Inspiring Women with Laurie McGraw. Please subscribe, rate, and review. We are produced by Kate Cruz at Executive Podcast Solutions. More episodes can be found on inspiringwomen.show. I am Laurie McGraw, and thank you for listening.